Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
We're so glad you've joined us today. We are going to continue our mini-series on training toddlers because we got some great questions.
Yes, we did, and we thought the questions were good enough, and they covered a lot of territory, so we thought we should just answer them for everybody.
Does that mean that some of the questions we don't answer online are not good enough?
Well, no, that's not what I meant.
I know. I know what you mean. I think what we mean is there will be a broad audience of people who will benefit from the answers to these questions, and some of the questions that we get really need to be answered personally.
Wasn't that beautifully said? Just beautifully said.
Thank you. I don't know what to say other than thank you.
I don't know what to say either. But thank you for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed these last two episodes as we talked about toddlers. As all of you realize that we missed a week and a little glitch in our scheduling, and several things happened there. Our producer was on a missions trip and things of that sort. But we are back on target, back on schedule, and thank you for staying with us. Hope you're liking, subscribing, sharing, putting into action what you're learning, all of those good things. And honestly, we do love hearing from you, and lately we've gotten a lot of interaction with this particular series and other questions that came along as well. So today, though, we thought, since we had several questions about toddlers, that it would be good to just, since we finished the series on toddlers, to answer these questions and tie it all together.
I wanted to refer to what you were talking about with us missing a week in putting out a new episode. And so that doesn't happen at all. And we are so thankful to Jamin. And so thank you all for just being patient with us, because without Jamin, obviously, the episode does not go on.
That's exactly right.
So we're very thankful.
So he is an essential part of our ministry.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Jamin, for all the work you do. And thank you for even taking the missions trip. That's always a blessing. And here we are, ready to get started. And here's the first question. This one came from a friend of ours, and who is raising two little ones, a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, right in the middle of trying to figure all this out, is how she said it. And let me just kind of read what she said here. I feel like my 2.5-year-old could be better behaved. I suppose that's a given for all of us.
Oh, yes.
And I do find myself repeating things over and over, and he often doesn't listen right away, which is frustrating. I'm finding that I do believe we need to be more consistent with discipline, as you talked about on the podcast. But here's the questions. We believe in spanking, but we've really grappled with how much and when it is necessary. We don't want to be those parents that spank for every little thing all the time. We want to reflect God's grace and mercy, not just his discipline. So trying to figure that out practically has been a challenge. You said that every sinful, willful act should be disciplined. Does that mean that we spank every time? Or would you consider like escalating punishment with spanking coming if the child refuses to change his behavior? How much warning do you give before spanking? Not sure if all that makes sense, but would love to hear your thoughts. Well, I would just say that all of that makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I'm just sitting here as a mom of our first two children are 14 months apart. So I understand the 2.5-year-old and the 1-year-old. And I'm thinking, wow, you are a busy mama and daddy. So
absolutely.
These are great. This is a great question.
A great series of questions even. That was a one idea with a variety of questions there. But here's a couple of things we would say. By taking care of every act of misbehavior, we simply mean that you take steps to address and correct it. Mm-hmm. So inside that idea of correcting, teaching is correcting.
Yes.
Reminding them of the expectation is correcting.
Yes.
Reviewing the expectation is correcting. Spanking is correcting, but spanking is one of those things that is always on purpose and is planned in advance for predetermined actions of misbehavior.
Right.
So we never spanked for every little infraction, every little detail. Mm-hmm. The Bible says that the rod and reproof give wisdom. And it's just a reminder there that speaking is a valid correction. If you have a toddler that you remind them of, this is what we expect. That was a misbehavior. This is what we expect. And remember that you're not angry. You're not, that's an unwise thing when our emotions are not in control and we're disciplining out of, we're correcting out of, frustration, irritation, bother, whatever. We all have to work at that because emotions kick in when we're tired or we're, impatient. We got a lot to do. Our schedule's full and busy. We've all been there, obviously. Right. But what we want to make sure is that we are just speaking. We take the time. And this is what is so hard when you're raising toddlers. It just takes a ton of time. And so what you have to do is you have to just every time speak and start there. If you have a 2.5-year-old and they misbehave and you stop and you speak to them, you point out that that's not how you behave. You may not do that. Here's what you have to do. If that child responds to that with an obedience or, eventually a yes, ma'am, or yes, sir.
Right.
But if the child responds to that, then that is correction. You're on the right path.
Yes.
But a spanking is reserved for those things that are predetermined, that this is an issue that cannot happen. And even in those issues, if a speaking corrects a misbehavior, you're done.
Right.
Would you say that's true?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just sitting here, I'm thinking of our grandchildren, Ellie, who is 2, and James, who is 1. And we have seen both of their parents speak to them, call their name. So this parent would call the 2.5-year-old's name. So in our grandchild's instance, it would be James or Ellie. So I have seen Bethany or Josh say to Ellie, "Ellie, no." And I have seen Ellie stop and turn around and look at her parents. And I have seen Ellie, kind of like, okay, yep, they're right. I'm not going to do that, and go and do what she's supposed to do. I've seen the same with Matt and Kareth with little James. They call his name. He's only 1, but they will call his name, James. No. And they keep his directives very, very short. As your children are getting older, you can give more explanation to your directive, but you still want to keep it simple because they're very tiny. But with James, it's just almost that one word, James, no. And then James will stop and look at his mom and dad. And you can tell he's reading their face. Okay, what am I about to do that I'm not supposed to do? And then James can make the decision. So keep it very simple. Speak to your child. If they stop what they're doing, awesome. If they don't, then you predetermine what you're going to do from there. It could be that you've asked them not to run across the street and they're about to go run across the street. Well, of course, you're going to go rescue them right away. And then you may need to give them a spanking so that they remember you absolutely will stop when mom asks you not to run out into the street. It could just be that they're taking a toy away from their brother or sister. And so you say, no, give it back. And then they don't. It could be that they don't understand what you asked them to do because they're so little. Well, then go over there and demonstrate. Okay, you took this ball away from your brother or sister. Let's give it back to them. If then they become willful, this is where you and your husband need to talk and sit down and say, okay, if they are going to willfully disobey me, then everything has to stop. And you predetermine how you're going to implement the discipline. There are times where you could just pick your child up and sit them on the couch and say, no, you just need to sit there for a few minutes, calm yourself down. Mom's going to calm down, and we're not going to do that. It could also be that your philosophy will include a spanking, which we think the Word of God does teach. So then you could say, no, you may not disobey mommy. And you have a predetermined place where you're going to go. You have a predetermined amount of, we're just going to do a small smack on your little thigh or on your bottom to make sure that you understand there are consequences for disobeying mommy, and then just give them a little bit of time to calm down. And really that should take care of the problem after maybe that one time, maybe a couple of times.
Regarding spanking, remember that it is just on purpose. It is planned in advance for a predetermined action. And so you don't want to have a revival meeting. In other words, you don't want to be spending your entire day going, no, don't do that because of this. A 2.5-year-old probably doesn't understand that.
True.
So what you do is you keep it very simple. No, you may not do that. And the goal for the child is to be obedient. There's no such thing as a perfectly obedient child.
Yes.
The goal is, though, that obedience becomes the norm of their life.
Right.
And of course, there will be times of disobedience, but the goal is to have it more normal to be obedient, less normal to be disobedient.
Right.
And so there are times when it requires a spanking. If you've talked and you've reminded and you've corrected, and yet there is an anger or there is lying or there is defiant rebellion.
Yes.
A defiant rebellion is a no, and the child is determined, I will have it my way.
Right.
At that point, nobody's angry, but you already have a plan in action. And so all you do when those actions occur, whether it's lying, anger, rebellion, you speak to your little one, you just briefly remind him, this is not how we behave, and mommy and daddy told you you would get 2 swats if you do this. At that moment, you remind them of the predetermined correction, you follow through. We normally only gave 1 or 2.
Oh,
It was
right.
very rare for us to give more than that. You can give more if the situation worsens or if the child continues to respond in defiance, but typically spankings are simple.
Right. And I would think for a toddler, really, you won't need more than 1 or 2 because that will really get their attention.
Absolutely. So you just give a quick swat, you speak to them, remind them this was wrong, this is what we told you would happen. You give the swat, you then hug them, pray with them, review the expectation, and it's over. And that it is very, very simple. If you can correct without a spanking, speaking is sufficient, but the goal is correcting the behavior, not necessarily the spanking.
And I do understand the listener thinking, well, I'm going to be spanking all the time. But really, if you predetermine just a few things that are spanking matters, if your child lies to you, which as a baby or toddler, that's very difficult for them to do, but it can happen. And then willful disobedience, you've told them no, and you've maybe even given them a chance and they don't, then that's willful disobedience. And then and David mentioned anger. If they get angry at you because you are making them do something, then that is something that needs to be curbed.
Yeah, we were at a RV park recently, and I watched a dad with his little one who had a little thing they were, riding a little trike of some sort, and he kept rolling it out into the road. And it was just, a local road where all the other campers were driving through. But the dad kept telling the little one no and bringing him back, no and bringing him back. And finally he goes down and he says, no, I told you no. And he picked him up and he swatted him 1 time.
Right.
And the kid looked absolutely startled, dumbfounded. And then he looked at the child very calmly and said, Daddy said no. And I observed that took care of the problem. The little one would look at the road, but kept the little trike or whatever it was he was riding. I don't know what you would call those. But he kept it where it was supposed to be.
Right.
So it was a very simple matter. That's the goal.
Yes.
So I hope that answers your question. We have 2 more here to get to today. Would you be able to share tips on how to train a 3-year-old who has a beautiful imagination on lying? We do a lot of pretend, imaginative play, but I want him to also understand that lying, if asked a specific question, is not good. This has just recently come up, and I wasn't sure how to handle it or train him on it. And this writer goes on to say, thank you guys so much for what you do for helping us. Lord knows we need it. And just so you know, Mom, we all need it.
We all need
We're
this
all in
help.
this together.
Yes.
A couple of suggestions Bethlie and I would make here. The first one is separate pretend is for play, truth is for life.
Right.
And so you use the idea, never call the imagination lying. So if a child is outside and they're pretending to be an airplane, they're not lying, that's play, that's pretend. So separate that word lying. Lying is a decisive act to deceive. So the point being, there's a difference in lying and play. So make sure the first thing we'd say to you, Mom, is use the word pretend for play. Are you pretending to be a police officer? Are you pretending to be a fire truck?
Right. And that can be encouraged. Your child should be creative and imaginative and have all kinds of fun. I just love that.
Yeah, books that are written, fiction books that are written by literally the thousands for centuries are about pretend.
Yes.
And that's not dishonest. So we use the words, tell the truth probably is the way to rephrase the other one. There are times when you tell the truth. And so you basically, Mom, what we would say is at this stage of your 3-year-old's life, you teach them what lying is. This is play, this is pretend, but lying is when you are not telling the truth. And so we'd say memorize some suggestions, memorize verses about it. The Bible says lying lips are but for a moment. The Bible is very clear that we are not to bear false witness. We are not to lie. And so find some verses about it. Read stories about lying and the trouble that 3-year-olds love to hear stories.
Right.
And they're a good thing. And there are great stories out there. I'm thinking like some stories from Aesop's Fables that I remember when I was a kid. People would tell stories. One was it an Aesop's Fable about the guy that would pretend he was like wolves were attacking the sheep?
Oh, crying wolf.
Yeah, and he would run down to the river, the village crying, and the people would come out, and then he was just lying to them.
Right. So his pretend got him in trouble. I was also thinking there are other stories. The Berenstain Bears are a huge series that were written a few decades ago, and they offer all kinds of little moral truths, you could say. And so I think they have one on lying. You could look that one up. You could probably find some online that teach that truth in a story form so that it does tell the difference to your child between this is pretend, this is play, and we're just having fun. But when it comes to real life, we need to always tell the truth.
Right. And Mom and Dad, what you want to do is you want to tell stories and use verses with a very serious, somber point that it is a terrible thing to lie. Terrible, terrible thing to lie. And you make that such a huge, you change your tone of voice, you lower your voice, you make it very serious so that when your child lies, they realize the weight of that. Oh my goodness. This is what Mom and Daddy were talking about and I'm doing it. It builds their conscience.
Yes.
And so what you want to do is you want to separate pretend, that's for play, from telling the truth, that's for life.
Right.
And so begin to separate those things. Teach what lying is by memorizing verses, by reading stories, telling stories. And then the last thing we would just tell you is explain what will happen if your 3-year-old fails to tell the truth and just go from there. Just explain what will happen.
Right. And it could be anything from asking your child to tell you the truth. You could say, you know what? I'm going to give you a chance to tell mommy the truth right now. And you could even give them a few minutes to go sit somewhere and think about it. You could say, you know what, this is not pretend, so why don't you sit right here on the couch and mommy's going to give you a chance, and then you come back and you tell mommy exactly what happened. If it's something that needs to be told in the moment and you already know what happened, then you can just say, well, you need to tell me the truth because God saw you and mama saw you. So I'm going to give you one more chance. You tell me the truth. And then predetermine what you will do about lying. Lying is a very serious matter. The Bible is full of verses about lying lips, and so you should treat it accordingly. And it is best to go ahead and nip it in the bud while your child is 3 years old rather than have a 13-year-old who is still lying to you.
And Mom, I hope that gives you some wisdom about this. And if there's further follow-ups you want to do, please send us another email. We'd be happy to help you if there's another way that we certainly can help you. So there's one more today that is excellent. Just a great question. And this writer says, I have a 2-year-old son, and lately when I tell him to do something and remind him to obey mommy and daddy, he tells me I don't want to do whatever it is. And I've been telling him it doesn't matter if you want to or not. What matters is that you obey. This has happened several times in the last few days, and I've just been thinking about it. The world pushes that your feelings matter and are so important. But I keep thinking of the verse that says, commit thy works to the Lord and thy thoughts shall be established. After we do the right thing, the good feelings come after we do the right thing. But I still feel a little bad, like I'm telling him his feelings don't matter. When I do care about his feeling, it's just that it's more important that he obeys as opposed to only doing what he wants to do. And here's the question. Is there a better or different way I can express this to him, especially as he gets older? And this is a loaded question because it actually deals with the philosophy of our day,
right?
That is very new. Our forefathers never concerned one iota about your feelings. They had the philosophy, children are to be seen and not heard. I remember as a boy going to my grandparents' house. There were places we could not go, things we could not say. We were not permitted to talk at the table unless spoken to.
Right.
And nobody cared about our feelings at all. So this is a very new, Mom, this is a very new idea that actually comes out of secular psychology, secular humanism, and things of that sort. This is a new idea.
I would say, I wouldn't say that they did not care about our feelings. I would say that they were teaching us to honor people who were around us, adults who needed to talk. In that instance, for, when you're sitting at the table, you let the adults talk, you are quiet. Or they were teaching us to know how to assimilate our feelings into real life, so that in our culture, every parent is taught to validate their child's feelings, and your 2-year-old's feelings will be all over the place. They will be hungry, they will be tired, they will be happy, they will be excited, they will be sad, they will be mad, and it will just go everywhere. And so the Bible doesn't teach that we disregard feelings, but the Bible does teach us that we need to learn to assimilate those feelings into real life and bring them under the power of the Holy Spirit. We don't need to validate them.
Sure. So Mom, what we would say to you is a couple of things here. Number one, remember that obedience is vital. It trumps everything else. So resist the thinkings that feelings are more important than obedience.
Right.
Feelings are natural. If your son learns that his feelings trumps his obedience, he will be crippled in many ways. It will keep him from learning self-control. It will keep him from learning self-denial. And it will, if that is not brought under control, cause him to struggle in all of his relationships in the future. And we are witnesses of that today, where marriages are struggling because people live by their feelings rather than their responsibilities.
Right.
So it is a huge, Mom, you're right to be concerned about it. So here's some suggestions as we wind up today. First of all, don't reason with your little one. Your little one is pretty young here. So don't reason with him. In other words, when it comes to obedience, just simply speak to your son. Ask for what you expect. Expect his response to be immediate, and teach him to have an immediate response. Mm-hmm. The response is not, but I don't want to. The response is, I don't like this. The only acceptable response is, I will do it.
Yes.
And that's the goal. So no child will do that naturally. Now, some are more easily willing to give than others are, because they have different personalities and, different, strengths of their will.
Right.
And I'm not sure which, child each of you are dealing with, but the goal of obedience is you speak, you expect the child to respond.
Right.
And if the child does not respond, then you have to determine in advance, don't fly off the handle. Don't handle this in the emotion of a moment. You determine in advance the correction. And what I would suggest to you is kind of a little bit what we've already said. Speak to your child, remind your child of the expectation, and then discipline him if there's no follow through on the expectation.
Right.
And that's a hard one, because it takes a few weeks or months, or, for some child, even multiple months, to really learn when mom asks me to do something, mom and dad, they mean it.
Yes.
And they will know if you mean it.
Yes.
And so the hardest thing is probably being consistent, because it's one of the things in our busy, socially media distracted culture, mm-hmm. is that it's hard to stop in the middle of things and deal with something. But it's essential.
That's true. I was also thinking, in this culture where there is pressure for young parents to gentle parent, which it's such an oxymoron, because really what you're doing in gentle parenting is crippling your children. You are teaching them that their feelings trump everything else and everybody else, and they are just going to grow up into adult-sized people who cannot adult. But anyway, and the Bible does teach gentleness all over. It's a fruit of the Spirit. So you can be a parent who disciplines and trains your children and still be gentle at the same time. So don't swallow the lie that if you follow biblical parenting, you're not being gentle with your children. So, but there must be so much pressure for you, even in the church, to try to train your child, and he is expressing not wanting to do what you want him to do, and people in the lobby saying, oh, but he's so tired, or oh, he's so whatever. He doesn't want to go in his car seat. He doesn't want to go in the nursery. And so they're expecting that you're going to get down on your knees and explain to your child in adult terminology why he should do what you want him to do. There's so much pressure to do that. And so young moms, first of all, let me just say to you, I'm sorry that you had that pressure to deal with that. We didn't have that. In the culture, the church culture that we grew up in, and we trained our children in, it was just expected that you're going to get a hold of that child.
And when that happens, it is beautiful. When you can say to your child, you're going to the nursery.
Yes.
When you can say to your child, say thank you to Mrs. So-and-so. Mm-hmm. When you can say to your child, come here now, it's time to go.
Right.
That makes life easy and simple and beautiful. Gentle parenting in our culture makes life very complicated.
Very complicated, but don't give into the pressure of that, even if it's in your church culture or your family culture. Believe that the Bible is true, and then just trust that it's going to take place. Because even in the Bible, when the Bible is speaking to us as adults, the Lord expects obedience before he sometimes gives understanding. Sometimes you have no idea why the Lord is asking something of you, but as you take those steps of obedience, you understand what's going on. And that is what's going to happen with your child. Do not expect that his feelings are going to fall right in line and he's going to understand. It's not going to happen. But you as the adult, you understand. You know where those feelings need to be. So give your child that direction, because then you will have more rest in your home, and you can then help your child with those feelings.
Absolutely. And so as we get ready to wind up here, moms and dads, one of the things we would just suggest to you is get on the same page. Have a long conversation about what should we do and how will we handle it, so that dad does the same thing mom does the same thing dad does. The more unified you are together, then the easier it begins to be for your child, because the child knows exactly what to expect. And a child that is learning obedience is a happier child.
Yes.
So these are really good questions. We're out of time today. We just thought these were good enough to maybe answer for everybody. Mm-hmm. Any final thought before we begin to wind up here?
I think we've covered it well. If you have more questions, just send them on. We may have to do them in a later episode, but these have been great questions.
Yes, and we certainly hope that you've been able to profit from our answering and discussing them with you today. Hey, it's November, and so Thanksgiving is just around the corner.
Yay.
And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be giving our 2-week Thanksgiving podcast episode. Mm-hmm. And what will those be about?
It's just about gratitude. Gratitude begins at home.
And I think you're going to enjoy those 2 sessions, so don't miss those 2 episodes. And we look forward to you joining us next week. Remember to serve the Lord with gladness. Have a great day today. If we can help you, reach out at any time. It's our honor to serve you.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.